My name is Felicia Anderson.
I'm Nikki Daniel.
And I'm Kristen Peepo, and we are doing the topic of race. First, we're going to kind of talk about the article. Our article was Color Blindness and Basket Making Are Not the Answers, Confronting the Dilemmas of Race, Culture, and Language Diversity in Teacher Education by Marilyn Cochran Smith. I'm just going to quickly summarize. The article talked about how there's no universal strategy for teaching about cultural diversity, and it really focused on how teachers need to get to know their communities and the families and students they're working with, so that way they can better educate their students about race. And it wasn't that you should just talk about all different kinds of race and then talk about the facts. You really need to dig into what your community and everything around you is in order to make an educated decision on how you should educate your students about race, and also talking about other cultural diversity. It made a point that we don't want to not teach race, so you don't want to just say that everyone's equal, because that's not how society works. So we need to be honest with our students, because that is helping them in the long run. So we're going to talk about some quotes that I took out of the text, and then we're going to comment on them, because I think these are the important parts that came out of this article. So the first one is, there is no universal teaching strategy for teaching about cultural diversity or for teaching children who are culturally and linguistically different from one another, from their teachers or from the majority students for whom instructional materials and school expectations are tailored and whose best interests are served by the continuation of the current situation. So this quote basically talks about how in the traditional way of teaching, we have these materials that are made for one type of student, and we don't reach out to all the different minorities, and everyone learns in a different way, and we've kind of gotten into where we just teach people the same way from the same textbooks. Any comments?
From what I got from that quote, I feel like it also goes along with including a variety of multicultural materials, especially ones that are within your community, which is what the article focused a lot on. And this includes textbooks, worksheets, posters, literature, everything. Teachers are doing this a lot more and seeing the importance of this more, but there's still a long way for us to go in our schools with that, is what I got from that quote in the article.
I would have to agree, and I also think it's important that, like they said, that we really just get to know the students and their backgrounds to understand where they're coming from and what they can bring to us to help us educate everyone.
So the next quote is, but it is also not advisable for teachers or children to mistake colorblindness for educational equality or to learn the characteristics of people of various races and cultures. If you keep reading in this paragraph, it goes on to talk about how when we talk about the characteristics of people, we're really not helping the students. We're not taking away the generalizations. We're creating generalizations about these races that we might not even understand ourselves. So we don't want to just put a color blindness. We want to make sure people are aware that there's race and what the issues are in order to help our students.
The main phrase I took out of that quote is the part where it talks about color blindness. When I was looking up resources for this topic, I stumbled upon many websites that talked about how teachers are uncomfortable speaking about race and how people are different colors and different races, and they act like they try to ignore the topic or questions about the topic. So I think it's important for us to not have this color blindness and point out that we are all different colors, but that doesn't mean that we're unequal or anything at all.
Yeah, I think it's important that we make sure that we know that we're not all equal, but we're all different, and that's okay, and that we need to make our differences acceptable and teach about them. And yeah.
And the last goal I picked was what we need are generative ways for prospective teachers, experienced teachers, and teacher educators alike to work together in communities of learners, to explore and reconsider their own assumptions, understand the values and practices of families and cultures that are different from their own, and construct pedagogy that takes these into account in locally appropriate and cultural sensitive ways. This kind of sums up the whole entire article. The article goes into a lot of different ways to research your community and how to talk about race within. This kind of sums it up that we as teachers need to make a change. We need to educate ourselves and make sure that we're not assuming that we know what our community that we're coming in to teach. And that we need to work at our assumptions and understand the values of the people around us and the cultures. So that way we can really teach in a way that is appropriate and culturally sensitive for the place that we are. So this really shows us that every place we teach is going to be different. So we need to take a new view every new place that we teach about how we're teaching race and culture and differences.
I think it's important that we also educate ourselves. Like the quote said, we need to step back and look at our own thoughts. And this doesn't necessarily mean just educating yourself about the history of the different races, more of just educating yourself in general, what your community's like we've said, and making sure you're approaching it in a way that makes the topic known and not a colorblind thing, but also appropriate for the students you're teaching.
Yeah, I agree. We always have to be open-minded while we're first coming in, and we need to, check yourself first, kind of like we done in class, figure out the type of person we are and how to make ourselves change before we're educating students if you have that color blindness, you need to figure out how to change yourself and educate yourself to avoid that.
Okay, so now the next thing we're gonna discuss is some current controversies or issues or arguments that revolve around the subject of race in our education systems. The first thing I stumbled upon is the idea of expectations for students of different races in the classroom. As much as teachers don't want to admit it, a lot of teachers do set lower expectations for minority students, which, as a result, they start to believe those lower expectations, not achieve as much. And I found a quote in the Huffington Post that said, the achievement gap between minority students and white students is continuing to widen. A report said that minority high schoolers are performing at academic levels equal to or below those of 3 decades ago, so it is widening. It also went on to state that this is attributed to lowering performance expectations, like we talked about, growing income inequality, which is another reason that race in schools become segregated, is because different income levels and areas, and diminishing resources. So that's one, is just lower expectations, which students believe, and then they conform to a circle of poverty. Anybody have any comments on that?
I think this is really true when we, as a teacher, we need to make sure that we want the best for all of our students. So we need to set high expectations for all of them, no matter who they are or what they are.
And I think we need to give them all the same opportunities to learn and not just limit, or the higher income people, give them more opportunities, make the opportunities available for everyone.
So the next issue that I stumbled upon is the idea of segregation in schools. And when we think about segregation, we think about in history when there were schools for white students and where other minorities couldn't attend. But today, schools are still very segregated, whether we notice it or not. This is most likely due to the income inequality that we stated earlier. Those areas with higher incomes tend to have more white students, while those with lower incomes tend to have more Latino students, African American students. So just the location of where these students live in the city, even the country, determines this. And there was a statistic in the Huffington Post, as again, that stated 80% of Latino students and 74% of Black students are in schools where the majority of students are not white. More specifically, 43% of Latinos and 38% of Blacks attend intensively segregated schools, where white students compose 10% or less of the student body. I couldn't read that. So that quote was from the Huffington Post, and it just talked about how, virtually to sum it up, white students are in schools together, and minority students tend to be in schools together, which creates segregation without us willingly creating it. And then another topic is the topic of multicultural materials that display different races in the classroom. Most classrooms are aware of this now, especially since the topic is becoming so important, but it's not where it needs to be necessarily. Teachers hang up a poster with different races on it and say their classroom is multicultural, which does not make the classroom that way. In our teaching strategies handout, there is a checklist that you can use to determine if your classroom is multicultural, and it talks about activities you do, materials you use, ways you approach things, leadership, and those sorts of things.
This kind of reminds me of the stuff that we talked about, making that continuum, I think it was. Like how to make your, like checking yourself, checking your classroom, making sure that you're being culturally aware and educating yourself and making opportunities that have to deal with all races and cultures and religions, and not just talking about a certain religion and or culture in a like discriminative way, just like talking about it so it's open and like anyone can think and understand it as how they want to.
Yeah, and I was just thinking back into all of my field experiences, and I don't think that we ever really touched race in any of them, nor did I really see like anything in the classroom besides like a poster that may have had different races on it. I can't really think of any of them that had like
I feel
were
like
teaching race
yeah.
or
I feel like a lot of schools and teachers like don't say anything about it.
That's what I feel
Like
too.
they don't say like. I think they're scared that they're gonna like separate them.
Yeah.
Not just
Or offend someone.
Yeah, it's hard.
And I think it's something that, just like when we were talking about in religion, that you need to start it at like a young age. So it's not something that's like, oh, something we're talking about race. What? You know, it's like they've always had it growing up. So who cares?
So that brings me to the last point that I was going to make, is that faculty members avoid the issue of race or questions about race. And it's important for us to be open so that students feel comfortable in the classroom, they feel comfortable talking about this, and it kind of gets rid of those prejudice attitudes in the classroom.
I think it's really important to like give students the opportunity to talk about themselves and their cultures and what they do, to like let the teachers know, and don't like stop them if they're going to say something about what they do at home or what their parents think about something. Just let it be known that that's okay, that's how you think, like we need to accept it and understand it.
Yeah. I think that we need to educate ourselves so we're aware of like all the different races in our classroom, or if a student asks and we don't know the answer, like it's okay to say we don't know the answer and we'll look into it, or get back to them with an answer, so then they just don't feel like they were just left and we don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So those were our thoughts about race. We will have a discussion. We can't wait to hear all of your thoughts as well. And feel free to say whatever you would like.